and I've not had any issues with snapping it. I mean, you don't really have issues with snapping a frame. You snap a frame and then the frame's broken. But this frame hasn't snapped yet. Touch wood. Where's some wood? Touch wood. Hello, welcome to the video. Today I'm going to be doing a build breakdown and long-term review of my 2023 Norco Fluid. It's the aluminium one. This bike here. So this is a 2023 Norco Fluid aluminium frame, size medium. It's not an A1 or A2 build or anything because I got the frame, a different fork, this shock, and a different seat post on Pink Bike. Used, very, very cheap. Don't entirely know where it came from, but it was very cheap. It was a good price. So yeah, I got this frame. It came with a Mazzocchi Z2 fork, which I sold straight away because I've had two of them before and they're not very good. Originally it came with an SDG dropper post, but that was only a 170 drop. I got used to running a 210, so this is a 210 one-up V2 dropper, I think, not the V3, with a shim to take it from 30.9 to 34.9. This shock is the same one that came with the bike, but I've added the low-speed compression knob. Super easy to do. The Fox guide on the Fox website is really clear. For 30 quid, being able to fully adjust the low-speed compression on the shock has made a massive difference. So, would recommend. Also worth noting with this shock, I've removed the stroke spacers. So it's taken this from a 210 by 50mm stroke to a 210 by 55mm stroke shock. That means the frame now has 140-ish millimeters of rear travel. And if you've got brainworms like me and you just want to mess around with stuff to see how it goes, can recommend it on this frame. I'm sure on the bigger frames as well. This is a size medium frame, by the way. I'm sure on bigger frames, like, you're not going to have any issues. On a smaller frame, you might. But even then, there was still a fair bit of space between the tyre and the frame, and the cranks weren't going to be smashing into the floor, so go for it. You'll be fine. It might put... I mean, I'm sure it voids your warranty on the frame, but this is second-hand, so I don't care about that. But yeah, would recommend. The fork. I completely forgotten about the fork. So on here at the minute, I don't actually know if it's in frame, but it is a Rockshox Lyrik Select Plus, which I got from Sports Direct, of all places. Originally, it was 160mm of travel, which was really fun for big hits and rough stuff, but 160 is probably a touch too much for this frame, in my opinion. I've changed the air spring in that. It's now a 150mm fork. It's really good. Worth noting, I bought this fork new, but it was super, super stiff from the factory setup. So I basically couldn't run any compression at all. I had to run it wide open because it was so stiff. I've now serviced it to change the air spring, and it's way more plush. So if you've got a Rockshox fork from the factory that isn't feeling that good, maybe just service it. I don't know if they try that hard in the factory. Sorry, Rockshox. The first fork I had on this was a Rockshox Pike 140mm. A Pike is probably the perfect fork for this bike, really, because it's nice and light. It suits the character of the frame. However, my Rockshox Pike, which is sat just out of view, the internals of it are not very happy at all. So there was no chance of me removing the air spring to put another air spring in. That fork has a 140mm air spring in it, and it will die that way, unfortunately. The wheels. The wheels on this bike are Hope Fortus 30s with Hope Pro 5 hubs. They've been absolutely brilliant. I've barely noticed they've been on the bike. I've had zero issues with spoke tension. I say I've had zero issues with spoke tension. I've not checked the spoke tension recently. I should do that. Tyres up front, we've got a Schwalbe Magic Mary Super Trail casing in the soft compound. For a UK front tyre, I think it's unbeatable. All conditions, it grips well, wears well, rolls well. Just a good tyre. I mean, it's not exactly a hot take thinking that the Magic Mary is a good tyre, but I think particularly for the slop we have in the UK, it works really, really well. Rear tyre is a Schwalbe Big Betty Super Gravity soft. Yeah. I originally had a Hans Dampf in the back of this bike, Super Trail casing, which was good. It was nice and light. It rolled quickly, but I had 2 fairly dramatic punctures with it. And yeah, I just wanted a bit more grip going down steep descents. No, I didn't want more grip. I wanted more braking grip going down steep descents, because the Hans Dampf is really good and grips well. But if you're on loose, steep stuff, the braking just isn't the same as a proper dedicated rear tyre. And I've been really impressed with the Big Betty as a rear tyre for that use. For me, personally, this tyre setup, Magic Mirror up front, Big Betty at the rear, is a perfect year-round UK all-condition tyre setup. Others may differ, but for me, this works perfectly all year round. The group set on this bike is Shimano SLX 11-speed. I really like the 11-speed stuff because it's smaller and lighter than the new 12-speed stuff. If you compare this 11-speed mech to the 12-speed, like, it is so noticeably smaller and just out the way. I also like it because it's a lot cheaper and you can still get it most places. And I don't need 12 gears. 11 is fine with me. Yeah, I know people aren't keen on the clutches on these because you need to service them a lot, and you do need to service them a lot, but they're really easy to service, so it's kind of, it swings and roundabouts really. I've noticed on this bike and the bike this derailleur was on before, if you're struggling to change out of the biggest cog at the back, like if you've got to like do a bunny hop or just backpedal a bit to get it out of the biggest cog, that normally means that the clutch needs servicing. So it's even got a little warning sign for when the clutch needs servicing. It's fine by me. What else do we have on here for the gears? It's a 32 tooth cog at the front. At the back, this cassette is actually from AliExpress. It's CNC'd, I think, out of steel. It's quite a lot lighter than the stock Shimano one. I just wanted to give it a go. And it's worked great. It's nice, it's light, it works. It's 1146. It's on its second chain, still shifting well, so I'm happy with it. And I think that's the gears. The brakes on this bike are, again, Shimano SLX. They're 4-piston SLX. They're really good. Not exactly a hot take saying 4-piston SLX brakes are good. They work well, reliably, easy to bleed, easy to set up. But in certain situations, I find they're either slightly lacking in power or they're slightly lacking in bite. I think it could be down to the stock Shimano pads. So I've run the sintered DO2S pads from Shimano for a while now, or for 2 pad lives. So however long it takes you to get through 2 sets of pads, I've been running those pads. And I think I'm going to try some different ones because they contaminate really easily, and when they get contaminated, they seem to just sand themselves down to nothing super quickly. So at the minute, I'm actually trying some Epic Bleed Solution sintered pads, and we'll see if they're any better. If anyone actually had some pads recommendations for these brakes, do hit me up. I'd like to know. Final bits to finish off the build then. The pedals are DMR Volts. You do have to service these a lot, much like the clutch on the rear mech. But I put some gun grease in these. I got the same grease that Fox tell you to do the low-speed compression knob with these. Works really well as pedal grease in DMR Volts. So I put that in a few months ago now, and the pedals are still feeling good. So I think it's stickier, and it's much more weather-resistant than other grease. So they've been good with that, but you do still have to service these quite a lot, which is a little bit annoying. Bars are from Ritchie. They're their trail ones. Saddle, fabric scoop. It's been on 4 bikes now. Still doing well. And the stem is a Thompson 50mm Thompson Elite X4. You've got to have some Thompson on your bike. I'm a fixie kid at heart, so you can't have a bike without some Thompson on it because they just make the coolest components, in my opinion. Is there anything else here? The chain's a Shimano 12-speed chain on the 11-speed. The chainring initially wasn't very happy about that, but after pedaling down the road a few times, it worked itself out. The bottle cage is a fake ODI one from AliExpress. It says it's titanium, but I suspect it isn't titanium. It does hold the bottle really well though. Yeah, got some Deity grips on there at the minute. Brand X dropper lever. Brand X dropper lever is not particularly good, but I snapped the one off I had on there before, and this was cheap and readily available, so that's on there. Rotors, 203 at the front, 180 at the back. Would like to go to 203 at the back, but I just haven't got around to doing it. Yeah, I think that's the bike. So that's the build breakdown. Now let's get into the review. You. Onto the review. So I started riding this bike while I had quite a bad shoulder injury. So I fractured and dislocated my left shoulder in a crash. And I built up this bike as a way to kind of get me through the injury, but also to have something to look forward to riding. And in many ways, this is the perfect bike to come back to riding after an injury. It's super predictable and it's super middle of the road, but in a good way. It just behaves how you'd expect a trail bike to behave. So my initial riding on this was pretty easy, just easy spins around the forest and just getting back up to speed with riding. And it was a perfect companion to that. Since recovering from the injury, I've ridden the bike in a lot of different places. So typical trail centres like Langdegla, Glentress, Gisborne, Cannock Chase, all that normal UK goodness. Bike performs really well there. I've also taken it on a lot of off-piste stuff. So I've ridden at Golfy, I've ridden at the Cannock Chase off-piste, Guyot Valley, Hanchurch, and a load of other, good off-piste nuggets. Always perform well. I've also taken it on some big pedals. So out in the Peak District, out in the Lake District, out in Yorkshire. The bike always performs well. It's a really good all-rounder, as you would want a trail bike to be. So perhaps most importantly for a long-term review, I've ridden this bike through every season possible. So I started riding this in the summer. We've been through the autumn. Now we're in deepest, darkest winter. And I think I've done at least 1,000 kilometers on the bike, according to Strava, maybe more. So yeah, I've ridden it a lot and it's held up really well. We'll talk about frame components and durability later on, but now let's talk about geometry, which is really what makes this bike so good. So as I've already said, this is a really middle of the road bike. It's predictable. It does what you want it to do. It's not going to catch you out. And the geometry kind of mirrors this. It's a well thought out bike. It's got a nice high stack. It's got kind of short chain stays, but not super short, not super long. Middle of the road. 65-degree head angle from stock with the 150 fork on. That goes to like more of a, I think it's 64.5-ish, so it's slightly slacker. It does slack out the seat tube angle a little bit, which is fine. And to be honest, that is my main complaint with the geometry of this bike. I wish the seat angle was slightly steeper from stock, but I think that's just the terrain that I have to ride. The uphills are really steep. The downhills are really steep. There's not that many places where you're pedaling up a gradual incline, so a steeper seat angle would be good for me, just so I can get a bit further forward. As you can see, I'm already at the end of the rails on the saddle. One thing to note, this is a medium. A large would probably fit me better. I went for the medium because it was cheap, and I've had a few bikes with a 450mm reach, and I've found that I get on with it fine. This has a 450mm reach. But yeah, I think it probably is ever so slightly too short for me. If Norco did a medium large, like Trek do, that would probably be the perfect bike for me. But to be honest, the large would probably also fit me quite well. I've already mentioned the stack height. It's nice and high, which is good. Confidence inspiring on the steep stuff. And with this fork, it's already probably got 20mm spacers there as well. So it's nice high handlebars on this. Don't have to go for super high-rise handlebars to get myself higher. Me personally, I don't love the way high-rise handlebars look. And I'm quite a vain person with my bikes. I like them to look the way I want them to look. So I'm happy with that. Let's talk about the climbing performance of the bike now. It climbs well in that it will pedal up a hill with minimal fuss, but it isn't the most inspiring climber. It's probably the best way to put it. If you're someone who likes to stand up on climbs and really mash them out, this is not the bike for you, because even with the suspension locked out, you'll be bobbing all over the place, and you're not going to get there any quicker from standing up and mashing. You're just going to move the bike more, which was a little bit annoying for me initially. I was riding a Stanton Switch 9 a hardtail before this a lot, and obviously that's a hardtail, so pedals great uphill. This bike, not so good when you stand up. It's basically got super active suspension, even with it locked out, which is good for the descents and really good for technical climbs. But for longer slogs, you are going to notice the bike bobbing a little bit as you pedal and just cycling through the suspension, which is fine. It's not inefficient by any means. It's not like pedaling a downhill bike, but you are going to notice it. And if you're somebody who likes to get lots of KOMs on climbs, this bike probably isn't the one for you. On to the descending characteristics of this bike. In 2 words, I would say it feels solid and dependable going downhill. As I've already mentioned at the top of the review, it's a super predictable bike thanks to the geometry and the suspension. It's not doing anything funny. It's not doing anything weird. It's not going to buck you. It's not going to blow through all its travel. You're always going to feel supported, and you're always going to feel in a confident position with the stack height on the bars. So yeah, most ascents, this feels confident and controlled, and realistically, you're probably going to reach your limits before the bike does. Say where this bike shines brightest is on off-piste, tight, twisty descents, when you're dodging trees, riding ruts. Nothing like crazy gnarly, not massive drops, not massive gaps, but just some good technical off-piste riding. This bike absolutely loves it. Another thing to note, setting this bike up was super easy. I went on the Norco website, their ride-aligned system, I believe is what it's called. Put in my weight, put in my riding style, gave me a shock pressure, which for me is 200 PSI in this. I think it was a little bit less than 200 PSI. It's like 195. I thought I'll just go for an even 200, and it's been spot on. Absolutely spot on. Even changing the stroke length to 55 millimeters, 200, works perfectly. The fork, I went by the Rockshox website recommendations. Again, I just put in my weight, put in my riding style. It spat out PSI, put that PSI in. It's been mint. When I first got this fork, I mentioned the compression. It was super stiff, so I basically couldn't run any compression, but now it's been serviced. I have the compression somewhere in the middle. It's fine. And I'm using the Rockshox recommended rebound settings as well. So shout out to manufacturers for just working this stuff out, because there wasn't actually that much setting up to do with this bike in terms of spring rates. It was just getting used to it, really. A surprise revelation for this bike is how well it handles high-speed chatter and repeated hits. If you just get off the brakes and let this bike eat in rough stuff, it handles it really, really well. Surprisingly well, even when it's just got 130mm rear travel. That being said, you will get to the limits of this bike if you're riding down stuff like that, because inevitably there will be a compression or there'll be a bump that is too big for the bike to really handle. It's not an enduro bike, and you will feel that through your feet and your hands, and it will remind you that it's not an enduro bike. But it fools you quite well until you get there, is what I would say. Speaking of running out of travel, or speaking of taking this bike too far, bottom outs on this bike are never harsh. I've bottomed it out a few times when I've overshot jumps or gone off surprise drops, and while I've noticed it, it's never clunked. It's never felt like I'm suddenly riding a hardtail. It's really well controlled at the end of the stroke. So kudos to Norco and Fox for working that out, because it's always got your back, is how I could describe the shock on this. With that being said, and saying that it never feels out of control, if you hit a big compression, then immediately go into a berm, you can feel the limits of this bike. So it could be the frame flex, could be the shock, probably not the forks because they're quite chunky. It's probably not the wheels. So the shock or the frame, compression into a berm, it doesn't feel squirrely, but it suddenly doesn't feel quite as solid as it feels the rest of the time. That is an extreme case though, and realistically that's riding terrain that this bike was not intended for. So yeah, all round, good descender. As I've changed the front travel this bike and the rear travel, should probably mention how that's affected the bike. For the rear travel, it's not been that noticeable, to be honest. It's just been better, and the bike has just handled chunkier stuff easier. I've not noticed it in corners at all, as you wouldn't really expect to. It's just bigger terrain, handles it better. The fork, going to 160 from 140, that was too much. I was getting stood up in berms, getting stood up in corners, and it just didn't feel as nimble and as whippy in the corners. Probably a good way to describe it. But going to 150, bike feels mint. Highly recommend 140, 150 on a Norco Fluid. Happy days. You'll be pleased. Reliability and livability. So I've snapped a linkage bolt on this bike. I snapped this bolt, or I slapped the nut of this bolt when I was tightening up without a torque wrench. I tightened it too much and it snapped. That's probably on me, in retrospect. Contacted Norco distributor in the UK. They get me a replacement bolt. All good. And until then, I did actually just use a normal M8 threaded bolt, and it was fine. So no issues there. Bearing wise, this bike was used when it came to me. I checked all the bearings. They were silky smooth, and they're still really smooth now. It doesn't feel like you need to crack into the travel at all. It doesn't creak. The bearings still feel really good, which is impressive considering, I mean, it's not the cleanest bike now. I do look after it. I'm not somebody who abuses their bikes, but I'm not religious about cleaning it. So it's held up really well to some really crap weather this year. Another thing to note, to undo the bottom bracket with a full-size bottom bracket tool, which goes all the way around it, you do have to undo the drive side chainstay at the linkage by the bottom bracket. You have to undo it and move it out the way. That is a little bit annoying, but it's not the end of the world. It's not crazy. You're just undoing another bolt to get to the bottom bracket. That's not the worst thing in the world. Just one thing to note there. Another thing with livability, the paint looks great, and I think this blue colour is lovely, but it does scratch quite easily. With that being said, that is a complaint I've had for the past 3 of my bikes, and I'm starting to think that maybe it's me and not the manufacturer's fault that the paint is scratching really easily. But if you're somebody who loves the finish on their bike to be absolutely pristine, I would probably get it wrapped just so it lasts a bit better. Conclusion, it's a good bike. I know that's not exactly a hot take. There's been lots of great reviews written about this bike, all saying how good it is for the money, but it is really good for the money. Frame, just super solid. It is slightly heavy, but it's an aluminium frame. It's dependable, and I've not had any issues with snapping it. I mean, you don't really have issues with snapping a frame. You snap a frame, and then the frame's broken. But this frame hasn't snapped yet. Touch wood. With some wood. Touch wood. So yeah, it's a good bike, and I would recommend it to nearly anyone, unless you're on the extremes of the riding spectrum. So if you are super cross country, care about the climbs, probably not the bike for you. If you're a super downhill dude, again, probably not for you. But basically everyone in the middle, you're probably going to enjoy riding this bike. Thanks for watching. If you've got this far, please like, subscribe, leave a comment if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one.